everybody, and welcome to another 80s Golden Age of Comedy. I am your host, Bruce Starr. It's just so exciting to be here. I am not only getting a chance to get together with my old clients when I was a personal appearance agent in Hollywood for stand up comedians, mostly out of the improv and some out of the comedy store. It was such a thrill back then to be a part of a golden age. I mean, when I speak to the comedians that I've worked with and I'm coming together with and connecting with again, they love the opportunity to talk about an incredible golden age of comedy. And for so many people still alive, the 80s were definitely a golden age of comedy. You'll have some people that will say, oh, there was something very special about the 70s. Absolutely. The 60s with their sitcoms, with Dick Van Dyke and all those shows, Lucy, absolutely. But when it comes to stand-up comedy and when it comes to performing, the 80s were it. And I was just such a lucky guy to have walked into the improv in 1981. My buddy Mitch picked me up at my sister's either that first night I got there or the second night and drove me over to the improv on Melrose and said, here, this is where you're going to live from now on. And he was right. I went there every day and hung out with the comedians and met different people, got closer to them, became roommates with a roommate who wrote for everybody in Hollywood at that time, all the comedians at that time. And we just got to know more and more comedians. And then Evening at the Improv just exploded comedy, stand-up comedy. And clubs were opening up all over the country. And that gave me the opportunity to approach the comedians and say, hey, listen, I know your big-time agents aren't going to be the least bit interested in calling clubs in Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and St. Louis. I don't blame them. They're trying to get you sitcoms and TV shows and movies. And I know you don't want to call those places. If you do, great. But if you don't, I would like to make those calls for you. And my roommate, Barry Marta, said, man, do it. Because it'll put money in their pocket. It'll put money in your pocket. And everybody wins. So you know what? I did. It's exactly what I did. And I eventually had 35 stand-up comedians that I was working with, from household names like Howie Mandel, the unknown comic Murray Langston, Paul Reiser, and so many others. It was just a great time. But what this show has afforded me is to meet talent that I haven't known before, that I've become aware of recently, that are doing a spectacular job out there entertaining. Now, we all know this last year was a throwaway, but I'm leaving this last year behind, and I'm moving forward with my plans to work with comedians and work with one-man plays and one-woman plays and getting them booked around the country, because I know the country is hungry for entertainment. I've been to a couple of different places in the last month or so down here in South Florida, and people just were ecstatic. They were laughing. They were having such a great time just being able to get out of the house again. And that time is going to be back. I think things are going to recover. And one of the ways that I'm going to have a hand in that is by working with the comedians that I worked with 40 years ago and getting them on the 80s Golden Age of Comedy tours. And also, I have several one-man, one-woman plays that are just absolutely spectacular. It's almost hard to believe that I'm going to be associated with such professionalism. And my guest on today's shows, one of those people that is the star of An Evening with Groucho Marx, Frank Ferrante. Welcome to the show. So glad to have you here. And thanks for spending time with me here today. So, Frank, I like to introduce you to my audience by letting them know literally, where you were born, where you grew up, and what your family life was like, and if that had anything to do with getting into show business.
Oh, thank you for asking, and thank you for having me on your show. I grew up in downtown Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Hospital, and my grandparents were Italian immigrants, and so we all grew up. There was this community of Italians, basically, in what my dad referred to as the barrio, right in downtown. And his family was very humble. It was a poor family, and but there was a community of Italian Americans that were in that area. There used to be an equivalent of a Little Italy where the Chinatown is now, but when the freeway went through, that ended, and all the Italians dispersed to the suburbs. So I grew up with this sense of community, a very supportive family, particularly the females. My grandmother's typical Italians. We're all over the oldest Italian grandson. And my mom was the only girl in her family, so she was the Italian princess. But they came from nothing, and I knew the stories, Bruce, and I knew the stories of my grandfather shining shoes for a nickel in downtown LA, and it left an impression on me. And what they did for me, and everyone worked hard. My dad is self-made. He put himself through college. He was a stockbroker. He's still around. Both my parents are 80. And, he did it himself. But what they allowed, and they, I was the oddball, Bruce, in that I was the only one who was into the theater, into live performance, into comedy. I loved all the comedians from the early vintage era up until the present. I mean, when I grew up in the 70s, I was loving Mel Brooks and Steve Martin and Peter Sellers and Woody Allen, and these were my heroes as a little boy. But to answer your question, I think that I was fortunate in that I had and not everyone gets this, Bruce, a nurturing family. If I wanted to be in a show, they showed up at all my shows at school. I wasn't the quarterback of the football team or pitching for but they saw the value in my doing this so-called artsy thing. So that's really, I was again blessed with this kind of an environment that allowed me to take chances, that supported me going into the library and researching comedy and performance. And what really triggered me, I mean, I loved in the late 60s, I was 3 or 4 years old, I was watching Paul Winchell on local television, who was the great puppeteer, who had the ventriloquist dummies, Mortimer Snerd and Jerry Mahoney and Knucklehead Smith. And this guy, I believed everything he was doing. And I got caught up. When you're 3 years old, it's happening in your living room. And then you're watching Lucille Ball when you're 3 or 4. You think they're in your living room. You're watching the mothers-in-law, Kay Ballard and Eve Arden, and you're going. So what was happening is I was absorbing all of their rhythms, timing, vaudeville timing, the kind of timing that Neil Simon uses in his plays, wisecrack humor, and that I absorbed. And really, the turning point for me, and I'll try to finish this answer for you, was I saw a Marx Brothers movie when I was 9. A neighborhood kid said, "Put the TV set on. You got to check these guys out." I don't know what he meant. I put the TV set on. We called it a TV set, and as you know, and then I'm watching this black and white film with the Marx Brothers in A Day at the Races, and I'm seeing these grotesque, wild creatures running around, wreaking havoc. Groucho with the mustache and the grease paint and the snide remarks, and Harpo, who's this crazy mute who's chasing women around, and Chico's on the piano, and it was just chaos. It was the antithesis of my Catholic upbringing and being in a classroom with nuns, where there was nothing but fear and the threat of violence. I saw abuse, physical and verbal abuse at 8. I'm looking at it. But the Marx Brothers and comedy and these comedians represented freedom and doing things the way you want to do and saying what you want to say, regardless of the social scenario, the setting. And the Marx Brothers raised hell. All the comedians that you love and I love are hellraisers, are truth tellers. And that was my introduction to this kind of the chaos and this different point of view that comedy and comedians present. And so my life has been tied to humor, whether it's this role, which is one thing I do, or working in the Cirque realm as a comic host or directing Neil Simon plays or performing in musicals. All that comes from that kind of what I'm sharing with you.
And what was the one thing that you saw in a Marx Brothers movie that sort of boom hit home like right here that made you say, I don't know what kind of direction I'm going to go, but I want to go somewhere in that direction.
Right. You know, for me, it was Groucho Marx's persona. It was the fact that he can come up with a response in mind so fast, as if it was in real time. And when you're a shy or self-conscious kid, you're just quiet. You want to be able to say what he said to Margaret Dumont, their famous foil, the authority figure. And I wanted to speak that way to the nuns. And so, like so many, I'm going to say millions of fans, and particularly young people of that era, Groucho was going through a renaissance at the time, if you recall. He was in his 80s with his beret. And you could see him on television and his movies being revived on the 3 channels that existed. You'd have Marx Brothers Week. So at 8 o'clock, Monday to Friday, here at KTLA, you'd watch Duck Soup, Monkey Business, etc. Monday to Friday. At night at 11, that same night, you could see him in You Bet Your Life as a middle-aged man. And at 11:30, you could see him on the Johnny Carson show or see him on Merv Griffin. So you're seeing the 3 ages of this great wit. So, but to answer your question, it was just his ability to have a quick response, which is what I wanted to have when I felt assaulted or threatened. And I think it's funny, Bruce, I meet a lot of people my age. I'm in my 50s. So I'd say I'm the last of that era, that age that knew about, really loved him and remembers him being alive. But I come across other people like me who went into the arts that were influenced by him. People that, like me, when Groucho Marx died, I was 14, I cried. I've mentioned that to a few friends. Like, oh yeah, we did too. I did too. He was this great artist. He somehow cut through and took your breath away. That's what the word artist is so thrown around, but in Groucho's case, in the Marx case, they were that, though they'd make fun of that, that descriptor probably.
Well, he certainly has left a tremendous mark on people in a way, renewing my interest in Groucho, but I never really got. I mean, I was a Three Stooges. I was a Laurel and Hardy. Mm-hmm. I don't think I ever really got the Marx Brothers. What did you get that I might have missed?
Well, I don't know. I loved how rude Groucho was, how brash he was, how fearless. And I think that's the main thing that penetrated me, that struck me, was the fact that he was so wrong in his behavior. And I was just dreaming to be as wrong. I mean, what he says, he'd listen to him, and he's that way to everyone, men, women. He just takes them down. He takes down every authority figure, anyone with power. Doctors, lawyers, politicians, professors, so that to me was exhilarating. And when I performed the show, that's, right before I go on, Bruce, and I've done I've done the character for 35 years. I've done it in New York and London, on PBS television, and I've done it all over the world, over 500 cities. And so I have this front row seat to how that humor still resonates. I did two tours of Australia. And the first performance, I'm going, wait a minute, what if they don't get what I'm doing? And of course, that first performance was when gangbusters. But there's something about the humor that still 100 years later works, and something I'm going to digress a bit, but you were talking about the later years of Groucho, and I did get to meet him when I was a boy, less than a year before he passed away.
Wow.
My father it was amazing. My dad took the day off of work, and he worked in downtown Los Angeles. And Groucho was going to make an appearance
at UCLA.
Well, no, it was at the Ambassador Hotel,
okay,
which is no longer there. It used to be the Coconut Grove where all the stars would hang out, but the Ambassador Hotel was still there at the time, and Groucho was there in 1976 to promote a book. So he was supposed to be there at noon. So I get there with my dad at noon. He's not going to show up. They tell us he'll be here in 3 hours. 3 hours later, Groucho shows up, looking so infirm, so fragile, so frail that I couldn't believe this was my hero. This was my Superman. This was my comedy icon, my god, right? And he shows up, stooped over, beret, thick glasses, could barely move, and all of us kind of collectively, I think, gasped. We couldn't believe this was the guy. There were 1,000 people. Yeah, there were 1,000 people at this venue who were all in their 20s and younger. Young people were there because he was this anti-establishment figure, Bruce. This is just after the Vietnam War, and Groucho had spoken out about it, against it, and was anti-Nixon, and so he had a huge following of young people, including me, who was on the younger part of the spectrum there. So, and he gets there, and everyone is shooed away. 1,000 people get away from Groucho. They can't breathe. But I stick to Groucho like a duckling, as if I'm supposed to be part of his entourage, like I'm meant to be with him. And he walks to the podium, and he gets to the podium. I sit at his feet, and he mumbles to the first part of this presentation. Bruce, can you see me? Can you hear me out there? Can you hear me out there? Make him, no, we're all going, no. And normally there'd be a joke like, well, you're not missing anything. But he didn't. But that wasn't there. Just an old man who was just trying to be heard. Well, finally, someone asked the question. And the question was, Groucho, are you making any new Marx Brothers movies? Now, everyone's dead, of course. His brothers, Margaret Dumont, he's the last survivor. And he looks up slowly. It was an insensitive question, and he could barely move. Groucho, are you making any new Marx Brother movies? He looks up slowly and says, no, I'm answering stupid questions. And of course, the audience goes crazy. And we're seeing old Groucho. The gears are starting to turn. And it gives me chills to this day. This is, I don't know how many years, 1976. And then a woman yelled, Groucho, what do you dream about? And he looked at her and said, not you.
Ah.
So just nailed, and everyone went crazy. So, still at that age, I thought, wow, this guy is dealing with his infirmity, his current state, through humor. That's the default. How he got through life is through humor and deflection. And so anyway, 10 years to that moment, I was playing Groucho at age 85 in New York, off Broadway.
Wow.
I was only 23 years old. And Groucho Marx's son had seen me perform a one-man show as a senior project. And he hired me to play his dad from age 15 to 85. I was 23 years old in New York, and I was 24 in London. It was crazy. This is in the late 80s, mid-late 80s. I was very fortunate. And I owe Groucho a lot, certainly. And there's a debt of gratitude I have to him and to Arthur Marx, Groucho's son. And they introduced me, and then as a result, I'm in the theater. I get to direct, I get to act, I get to still do the show, I get to edit material, write material. I get to be in front of audiences doing improv, and you know what it's like as a comedian and someone who's done it, and and you have done it. It's been a while.
I have not been a stand-up. I never wanted to be.
You never did any stand-up?
No, believe it or not. It's sometimes hard for people to believe, but I'll tell you what.
I would have thought you were, but you were right there facilitating careers of stand-up.
And listening and
I always assumed that you did.
And boy, I tell you, here in South Florida, I make people laugh almost all the time, every day, because it's such easy pickings, because I understand comedy. I understand what's funny and what's not, what's expected and what's not. And Groucho is a perfect example of that. You don't expect to hear anything out of his mouth that he says. And that's where the extreme humor comes from, especially from an 85-year-old.
You're right. And the element of surprise is what I think you're getting at, too. He continues to surprise. All the great comedians surprise you. Chappelle surprises us constantly. You don't know what's going to come out of his mouth or what he's going to come up with. He's so creative and so ahead of the game. There's a lot of great comedians. People always say, "Oh, who's funny more?" It's like there are so many funny people in the world, and there's so much more access to it than when I was a kid. My gosh, I had to go, watch one of 3 channels, have like a reel-to-reel tape recorder if I wanted to save it and re-experience a show, a performance, a comedian. And there's so much funny out there, which is great. You know, there's no end to it, and that makes me happy because hell, we all need to laugh. And like you said, this past year has been a throwaway year, and humor is huge. And, you know, it's about there is, you know, there's hope on the horizon. And for people like me, my career is almost entirely on the stage as a director and a performer. Very little television, some voice animation, thanks to friends and acquaintances who've seen me on stage. So I'll usually get things handed to me. Hey, do you want to be in SpongeBob? I saw you 25 years ago. One of the executive producers at the Pasadena Playhouse doing Groucho. Never forgot it. Would you do a Groucho-like role? Or a friend of mine who was producer Garfield would go, hey, I know your work. Want to do a couple of. So I've been fortunate that way. But the more you do, the more you get generally. And so I've been really fortunate, Bruce, in that it just up until the last year, it's been nonstop for me in a variety of projects. And you know, certainly, I'm the Groucho role is one that's satisfying because I get to mature with it. So imagine going from age 22 to 58, and every year I've done that character. So as I go through my ups and downs, and as I mature and as I learn, all that's being applied to the performance. And what's fun about it, and since you have been around stand-up your whole life, and you were there at a key moment in comedy history, what's critical to the show I'm doing is the improvisation. A third of the show, it doesn't matter if you like Groucho or no Groucho or not. It's me filtering his style, doing crowd work. And I didn't know crowd work was an expression until recently, but I've been doing it for years, and it's expanded within my shows, whether it's Groucho or this Cirque. I do this Cirque character called the Caesar in a show called Teatro Zinzani. I'm about to do 6 months in Chicago in this venue I opened in the theater district. Very proud of that. But I'm the host. You know, I'm the MC, and it's, you know, and I bring people on stage, which will be interesting during this kind of semi-post-pandemic era. But you know, there's only one Groucho. Only he can do it. Great. He's the thing. He's the original. He's the genius. I'm just sharing him and I'm interpreting him and sharing it with audiences as style of humor. I don't put anything on it than that. I've never been a big tribute show person. I respect great impersonators, impressionists, but that I don't see myself like that. But I do see myself as a crowd worker and an actor. But I love, as you've experienced in that world, there's nothing like that's when a comedian goes off and the audience is getting something completely new and original, and they know it. And even though I'm wrapped in the Groucho character or the Caesar character, it's satisfying, you know, either way.
Now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Hey, gang, I've been told by a lot of the comedians I knew and represented during the 80s, I looked the same as I did 40 years ago. And come to think of it, I still have my thick brown hair and just a few wrinkles. But most importantly for me, by simply applying the completely safe human growth hormone homeopathic gel on my skin just 2 times a day, the depression and panic attacks I suffered from years ago were gone in just 2 weeks. And then I started deep sleeping for many hours at night. You know, you can have the gel work for you too. To find out more, contact me at bruce@brucestarproductions.com.
But the Caesar character, what I was getting to, is my own creation. I didn't want to just be the guy that is known for that role, though I'm proud of it. But I've been lucky that I've had my fingers, and that's, you know how it is. We're constantly reinventing as people in the arts and performance, and that's what I've been doing. Someone said, Frank, can you direct a play? This is 30 years ago. Sure, I never directed a play. You direct a play, you learn. You never say no. I rarely say no.
Of course, I've done that before. Of course. You know, you've certainly watched enough, and those people started somewhere. So, and you know, once you do the first one, and certainly by the time the second one comes along, pretty darn good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have good instincts, right, and a good ear, and have been immersed in it and have observed, as you said, and I've been directed by good directors that were New York folk and you know, Broadway and off-Broadway folk. So they came to the table with great chops. So I was studying the directors. I go, if I ever direct a play or a musical or some kind of live event, I'm going to take that person's skills forward. And I just learned from a lot of great people. I've worked with great people, Tony Award winners to great variety acts, contortionists, aerialists in this other variety show I'm referencing, Teatro Zanzani. And you realize, Bruce, that it's do or die. A circus act sometimes works without a mat or a net. And I'm in these shows as the mad, crazy, chaos inducing MC. And so, sure, at any point, someone can punch me or be offended or not want to play on stage with me when I bring them up. And I bring up 8 people during the course of the show and play with them. And I don't know what's going to happen. But when I watch an aerialist or a contortionist or some kind of balancing act, it's inspiring. You realize, oh yes, it's do or die. That fact that they're willing to take, these are experts, but they're willing to literally, be hurt. They know the risk involved. There's something exhilarating about that kind of commitment with physical acts, and there's certainly a shelf life for physical acts in the variety world. Cirque du Soleil has certainly brought back that form to a great extent, as you probably have seen.
Absolutely. I don't usually suggest that people leave their contact information this early in the show, but I have a feeling that I'd like you to leave your contact information so people can find you and find where you're performing. And hopefully I'll have quite a bit to do with that in the near future. But how can people get in touch with you?
The best way right now is a new website. It's eveningwithgroucho.com. My schedule's there, my bio's there, and that's the best bet right now. Or find me on Facebook under An Evening with Groucho, and you can follow that. And it'll take you to different parts of my career and journey and the gigs that I'm up to.
By the way, some great reviews, great statements by looks like 100 people, top people in the industry, reporters, reviewers that talking about your performances. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. You talked about being able to integrate your act with the crowd. One of the things that blew me away about Howie Mandel, before he was super famous, he was just really good on stage, is if you've worked the Comedy Store, I'm sure the big room, it's kind of wide. It doesn't just go back, it's kind of wide. Mm-hmm. And Howie went from side to the center to side, working and talking to different people and getting information out of those people. And then somewhere a few minutes later, be able to take what this guy said over here and make it funny from what this guy said over here. And
right.
I mean, it sounds easy while we're talking about it, but it's not. And to make it work, so you're talking about improv, you're talking about right on the spot, saying things funny out of your head. It may or may not be funny, but when you find somebody like Howie Mandel or the unknown comic Murray Langston,
right,
where they're almost like 90-something% right on every time they take a chance, that's amazing stuff.
Yeah, it is. You're right, and a lot of it, Bruce, is really at bats. Like the more you do, hopefully the better you get, and that's what it is. Playing every town. Like I've played the Sticks, I've played big cities, London to Amsterdam to LA, New York, we in Chicago. I played, little theaters in the South, the Midwest, and I treat it all the same. And you learn from every one of those performances. You learn when to back up, when to lunge, all of it, how to play, the sections, as you say, how to take information early on and then call it back later. All of that is what I do within these 2 characters, which is pretty darn close to stand-up. One of my favorite books on the topic is Steve Martin's Born Standing, which is a great autobiography for those who want to learn more about what it's like to actually be in that 1 second of making making that ad lib, because in that one beat you're considering what happened before, it's what's happening right then, and what's going to happen after. That happens like that, And that's just someone who's attuned to it, who's got a particular capacity for it, but also it's experience, instincts also have to come and play. Not everyone has good comic instincts. He's a genius, but it's a fascinating read, Bruce. If any of your listeners,
he's a brilliant guy. And when I was out there in the late '90s, I actually wrote a letter to him. I don't remember if I wrote to anybody else, but I wrote him a letter asking if he would be like a little bit of a mentor to me. And unfortunately, I must have gotten him at the wrong time. And he wrote me back a nice autograph letter saying he's very sorry. But I share your respect for him. And it would have been nicer to have had an audience with him and had someone. One of the things that didn't happen for me with a super successful person was someone who could help me along the way. I had a roommate, and he helped me a lot. He wrote for all the comedians. He wrote for Leno and Letterman and Gabe Kaplan, all those people. And
who was it?
His name is Barry Martyr.
Okay.
And you might see him on Jerry Seinfeld's show, Coffee with a Comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He's been on a couple. He's like Jerry's best buddy now. So his first name is Barry, just to show you how close they've gotten. When the Bee movie came out, what was the name of the lead bee in that movie? Barry. So
a good roommate is important.
Oh, absolutely.
My college roommate. The reason I'm here speaking with you, Bruce, is that I had a roommate that ended up a William Morris agent. That's literally, he was in the mailroom when we were in college. But I was shy. I wasn't like, I didn't know how to push, but he knew how to do these things. So I was putting the show on at USC on campus as a senior project. He's my roommate. And I sent invitations to everyone that knew Groucho. I wanted them all there to see me. I talked about audacity. I mean, I had nothing but cojones, Bruce, but I invited everyone in the business from at the time, Lucille Ball and Jack Lemmon and people like that, all of the Marx Brothers writers, George Fenneman as announcer, anyone is all of Groucho's family. The ones that showed up, well, before I get there, I did invite Groucho's son to come to the campus. And about 7:30 in the morning, we get a call in our dorm room. And I didn't pick it up. My roommate thankfully did. This is Topper Taylor. This is who ended up being an animation exec. Did really well. It's done well. But he had this 19-year-old kid picks up the phone, and there's angry Arthur Marx. Hey, I hear you're doing a show about my father. I already have a show about my father. What do you think you're doing? And by the time my roommate Topper was done with Arthur, Arthur ended up showing up. He convinced Arthur to show up at the performance. In fact, he was so brilliant. He goes, Arthur, I'll tell you what, Frank is going to do a little rehearsal if you wanted to show up on campus. And all the local networks are going to be there. Not true. ABC, NBC, CBS. And then he goes, all right, I'll show up and we can run some stuff, right? And then he calls the three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and says, hey, Arthur Marx is going to be coaching this student at USC, and if you'd like to show up. 2 of the 3 show up.
Wow.
ABC and NBC show up on my campus, and there's Arthur Marx, and there I am. And this was Arthur and I had never even really met. And so now we're pretending we're doing some kind of work together. It's all show business. And Arthur came to my show that week, and he said, Frank, if I ever do a show about my father again, I'd like to use you. And that's what happened. I performed for him and Groucho's daughter, Miriam, and Maury Riskind, who co-wrote Animal Crackers and A Night at the Opera. He's 89 at the time. So 3 very important people to this hero of mine are there. It's my 22nd birthday, April 26th, and they're all there. And I do the show, it kills, everyone stands up. I did some little bit of improv, which I didn't really do much of at the time because that, as you know, is something that evolves and has. But anyway, that's what happened. Back to roommates. We could do a book just called Roommates.
Well, you know what? I always tell people, and I was like a teacher at schools, and I would say to people, make a lot of friends. Make friends,
Yes.
because as you graduate and go to college, if you make friends there, you know, when they get a job someplace really cool, who are they going to bring along with them? Or if
It's
they,
true.
whether it's an accounting or acting or whatever it is, you know, be kind to people, be good to
Oh yeah.
people, and they'll remember you. And they won't remember you if you aren't kind to them. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, that's such a great take on all of it. You know, I've got two teenagers and I think about that all the time. And it's like, just keep making friends and be generous with people. I wish I'd had that more. I wish I was more able to grasp that when I was younger. You know, a lot of it, you know, and when you're in the live vein of existence, it's survival. And I've been lucky, but you know, it's really about just keeping it going for a lot of us. I'm a working journeyman performer, and I'm proud of that. Yeah, I don't expect, you know, I'm never, you know, I've had moments of glory, and I've had very humble moments, but my goal for the next 30 years until I'm in my 90s, 40 years, is to keep going and to
Hmm.
keep creating and to keep perpetuating a style of humor that I enjoy and try to keep it fresh and original, you
Right.
know, and not. So that's what I'm about.
Absolutely. Do you remember uh, any part, 2 or 3 minutes part of that uh, presentation you made at UCLA? Can you run us through a little bit your
At
favorite couple of
USC, yeah,
minutes?
it was at USC, and I mean, I did, yeah, sure, I can give you some bits of it. It was at USC, and it's the still that's the show that I'm still doing. You know, I ended up getting cast to do Arthur's show, which is a biographical piece. But the show An Evening with Groucho, which was recently filmed, it'll be rolling out next year on public television, thankfully. Uh, but I digress. The An Evening with Groucho
It's a
is,
good digression, though. Hey, that's a
yes,
good digression.
that's right. Um, it's really it's the convention is, Bruce, what would it have been like if you were sitting with Groucho Marx for 90 minutes in 1936 in his living room or in his theater? That never happened because he always worked with his brothers. So I'm there. I have, you know, in basically what looks like a study, and I'm telling stories, singing songs, kibitzing with my piano player, working the crowd. And so it's an original experience in that way. It never happened before, though the material is Groucho's and mine. But what some of the stories would be, trying to think of some. Well, I sing the great songs like "Lydia the Tattooed Lady," which was written by Arlen and Harburg, who wrote the entire score of Wizard of Oz the same year in 1939.
Wow.
But so there's some gems like that that have a lot of innuendo. Lydia, oh Lydia, say, have you met Lydia? Lydia the Tattooed Lady. She has eyes that folks adore so, and a torso even more so. I mean, come on. There, you can't beat that. I'm trying to think of some of the speeches I do. I do a ton of them. There's the, you know, the famous, animal crackers, Captain Spaulding routine. My name is Spaulding, Captain. I go into the audience. My name is Spaulding, Captain Jeffrey T. Spaulding. I bet you can't guess what the T stands for. And they'll say something like Thomas. Thomas? No, it's Edgar, but you were close. As I said, we tried, you know, so as I said, we tried to remove the tusks from the elephants, but they were so finely embedded that we couldn't budge them. Of course, in Alabama, the Tuscaloosa. But that's entirely irrelevant to what I was talking about. Just boom, 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 boom. You know, groaning now as they did 100 years ago. But and then I throw in a joke like, "Have you heard that one?" You know, all those sabers, all in Carson. You know, and so everything old is new again. There's a great when I was developing the show with Arthur Marx, we were in Kansas City Dinner Theater right after graduation. So I couldn't believe I was being paid for this job. I would have paid them to do this, right? But I wasn't going to tell them that. So I was getting paid to play this my hero. I'm 22. It's Kansas City Dinner Theater. The guys that owned that theater ended up producing it off Broadway and then in London. But we're trying to find transitions because I start out as a 15-year-old Groucho, high pitched voice. Hey, Pop, what are you picking on me? You know, kind of nasally, kind of New Yorkies, and then as it gets older, it's one morning I shot an elephant. And that sound, how I got in my pajamas. And then as he does You Bet Your Life, I got to age him more. So physically I change, vocally I change and it gets lower and more anchored. Welcome, welcome to You Bet Your Life. Save the secret word and divide an extra $100. It's a common word, something you see every day. George, bring on the next. The more subdued, more affable, warmer for that era. And then old Groucho. First, I would like to take a bow for Harper and Chico. Very soft and stroke ridden. But I'm just kind of chucking it out. It's still early for me out on this coast. But the point is, Bruce, we were looking with Arthur and I were. Arthur was looking for a transition between middle age, You Bet Your Life Groucho, and octogenarian elder statesman Groucho. And I can give you this. And I'll tell you what. He calls me in the morning again, another early call for a 22-year-old. I get up, I step on my suitcase, it hits me on the head. It was like a farce. And I answer the phone. It's Arthur Marx who's in the next. It's probably in a suite, and I'm probably in a studio somewhere, right? So he said, Frank, but I got it. I got the transition. My father used to always say, Padre used to always say to me, there's no such thing as an old joke if you've never heard it before. And I thought, wow. So I become the older Groucho on stage. It's just a little application of white, put the beret on, thick glasses. And that's how that came about. And the speech actually refers to me, the fan, that I say as old Groucho. It astounds me that kids that weren't even gleams in their grandparents' eyes, they're laughing at things we did over 50 years ago. Just goes to show you, there's no such thing as an old joke if you've never heard it before. So this kind of cosmic thing, I got to be, my generation is referenced within the show, in which I'm playing my hero. It's a beautiful show. The show did really well in New York and London, but there's plenty of, like I said, improv in the show I currently do, and that stuff changes from, you play with bald people, you play with kids, you play with, old. There's in the film version, there was an old couple there. The great thing is you can look in the audience, and there's people of all backgrounds, which makes me happy. Mostly theater goers of 45 and up, who go to these shows, who have some so-called disposable income. But there was a couple that had been married there was a 14-year-old in front of this couple that had been married for a long time. And I said, so I said, how long? I said, you look familiar. You've been to the show before. He goes, yes, I have. I said, how old are you? He goes, I'm 96 years old. 96 years old. So you're older than my jokes. Big laugh, He goes, and how long you been married? He goes, 72 years. That's a slice of hell. Of course, everyone, but it's all happening. And people love it because there's so much truth to that. It's like the idea of being with someone being with myself for 72 years seems brutal, let alone someone else. But, so that's what Groucho's great at, the truth telling. It stings. It's irreverent. It's unexpected. It's surprising, as you were saying. The surprise element comedy, you want your comedians to have big brains and their own point of view and an original point of view. I'm not a stand-up, so I have great respect. I've done stand-up like work, but I have so much respect for those people that you're referencing, from Howie Mandel's, the Murray Langston, and I grew up, watching these guys as a teenager in my 20s, and you study those guys too. Nothing comes out of a vacuum. Everyone is observing everyone and saying what works, what doesn't work, who do I want to be within my profession.
Frank, when you're a very good performer and you're really good at what you do, the audience buys it 100%. They believe. Some people might just believe, just like when we were growing up and we saw characters on TV, we thought that's the way they were. That's the way Fred McMurray was in My Three Sons. Archie Bunker on All in the Family. Was Archie really that way? Of course not. But when you're really good at what you do, and you're doing live stage, have people come up to you at all thinking that they're like meeting Groucho?
It's happened, Bruce. It's happened on occasion. where I just play along, and it might be an older person, or he goes, "Oh my gosh, I loved you and your brother so much." And I'm at the merch table, I'm signing programs or DVDs or photos. And I said, "Well, thank you so much." But that's happened, I bet, a dozen times over the last 35 years. And, I don't want to break the illusion. In a way, I am a chance for what I do is an opportunity for people to see him live. And people will travel long distances or fly in or travel hours to see this, which makes me happy that people want that experience like I would. I'm very moved by a good performance. Like Hal Holbrook of Mark Twain Tonight. He is the master. He is the grandfather of the solo form. We became friends in the last decade. He passed away this past year, and I loved him, and he gave me his thumbs up. I have to share one story. I was in Easton, Pennsylvania, doing my show there, and I think was it the State Theater, a big theater there. There were like 1,200, which is good size for a one-man show. There's 1,200 people in there, and I was so happy to see in January, first week of January, which is not an easy time. So you know what I'm talking about. In cold, it's Pennsylvania. Anyway, there's 1,200 people, and there's this huge line afterward. And I can't believe I'm a guy that just did a performance about a comedian who's been dead for 35 years, and there's this kind of affinity for him, love. It's like and it feels like a rock concert in terms of the laughter that comes in like really hard, and it's so exciting that I can conjure that through this persona. So a guy my age at the time, was probably 10 years ago, comes up to me and goes, "You're him." So what do you mean? I said, "You're the guy." I said, "Yeah, what do you mean?" "So you're the guy." I said, "Growing up, we all wanted to be Groucho. You got to be Groucho." I knew what he meant. I got to be the guy, to be that. I no longer had to be that shy, self-conscious kid. I got to jump off the cliff, and it scares me every time I perform. I still have that same angst like most performers do, and nervousness. But that was my own personal challenge, was how do I stop being the scared kid and just jump off the cliff? And Groucho was an entree for me, not just for that role, but for my life in the theater. So I leave you with that story, young man.
That is beautiful. Hey, I want to thank you, Frank, so much. Frank Ferrante, great show, and you and I will hopefully be working together. I love the idea of continuing to bring you in front of audiences and treating them to something that they can't get anywhere else. And I congratulate you for the wonderful work that you do, and I look forward to working with you in the future.
I look forward as well, Bruce. Thank you for your time and for giving me a little spotlight today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. We'll see you again on another 80s golden age of comedy. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care now. Now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Hey, gang. I've been told by a lot of the comedians I knew and represented during the 80s, I looked the same as I did 40 years ago. And come to think of it, I still have my thick brown hair and just a few wrinkles. But most importantly for me, by simply applying the completely safe human growth hormone homeopathic gel on my skin just 2 times a day, the depression and panic attacks I suffered from years ago were gone in just 2 weeks. And then I started deep sleeping for many hours at night. You can have the gel work for you too. To find out more, contact me at bruce@brucestarproductions.com.